Internet, my name's Lave, and this week I watched X-Men Apocalypse for the second time, and with that in mind this is going to be a spoiler talk video. If you haven't seen it yet, don't worry, you can click on my spoiler free video right here or by clicking in the link in the description. Okay, so this film's been getting mixed reviews. As I said in my spoiler free video, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was terrible. It's definitely not the worst X-Men film. So let's start with some positives, namely the beginning of the film. It's all set in ancient Egypt, 3900 BC. You're introduced to Apocalypse, or rather an Apocalypse transferring his conscience into another mutant because he's getting old and dying. The body he's getting transferred into is Oscar Isaac's, and he's got the ability to heal, so he will inherit that ability. And I really liked the other four horsemen as well. They're essentially protecting him because there are thousands of Egyptians there worshipping him while he's inside this pyramid. But ultimately some betray him and they try to entomb him and collapse the pyramid, so all of the four horsemen jump into action. One's throwing fire, the other can kind of turn people inside out. There's a really cool scene where one of the horsemen catches a person in midair and then folds him in on himself and awesome. So Apocalypse just about transfers his body into Oscar Isaac's when the whole place comes down and he's entombed for thousands of years. Then on comes the title sequence, and both times I've seen it I remember sitting back thinking that's a solid start. It then flashes forward onto 1983 with the young Cyclops Scott Summers at school. His powers are just beginning to emerge, and that's quite a cool sequence where he takes out a school bully. Plus the scene serves as giant exposition with the teacher basically explaining what happened in 1973. It's rammed down your throat. Okay, this is where we're at now, but okay. It then cuts to a scene which really reminded me of X-Men 1 where we found Wolverine fighting in a cage. This time it's Angel. He's taking out what looks like the Blob, and then he has to take on Nightcrawler, and Mystique shows up and sets them free. She's kind of considered to be a hero amongst the mutants for saving the president in X-Men Days of Future Past, and she doesn't really want that title or that accolade, so she stays in human form most of the time. Either that or Jennifer Lawrence couldn't be bothered to go back into the blue latex. We then catch up with Magneto, who's hiding out in Poland. He's got a wife and kid now, and he's worried about getting exposed, especially when he saves someone from an accident at work. But he's not trying to set up the Brotherhood or anything, so I can understand why some people might be a little bit pissed off with that. It does lead to what I feel is the most emotional scene in the film, but I'll talk about that more in a second. That's because the film then jumps back to Havoc from X-Men First Class, and it's revealed that he's the older brother of Scott Summers, so he takes him to Professor's School for the Gifted. There they bump into Scott's future wife, Jean, played by Sophie Turner. They're introduced to Professor Xavier. Nicholas Hoult is back as Beast, and he makes Cyclops his glasses. There's a really good scene where Cyclops is testing his eyes out and he splits a tree. Very good. But there's no hanging about, because then it cuts to Moira Taggart, once again played by Rose Byrne. She's investigating this cult who it turns out are worshipping Apocalypse, and she unwittingly releases him again. This sets off some pulse which rumbles the whole world. It makes Professor Xavier use Cerebro, who inadvertently tracks down Moira, and he's like, I gotta check her out. Now everything that I've just said there all takes place within the first 20 minutes. At first I thought that was quite positive. It was going at quite a nice pace, but it just kept going, and it didn't feel like it ever got to dwell on any of the characters, especially because it just continues to do that. So from there, Apocalypse emerges. He finds Storm, powers her up. He then finds Psylocke, powers her up. He then finds Angel, powers him up and turns him into Archangel. He then finds Magneto and powers him up. And the worst thing about it was, the more it went on, the less you find out about the characters and their motivations. I honestly couldn't tell you why any of the four horsemen join him. I don't think they're being mind controlled. They just kind of get powered up and go along for the ride. I guess you could say that Storm is kind of tricked into it, because Apocalypse does say that he wants to cleanse this world, but he says it in Egyptian, and then she says, what? And he's like, save. Join me. Yeah, just a bit disappointing. However, Angel does have a really cool Cronenberg body horror transformation scene when he's turned into Archangel. That was cool. Magneto, on the other hand, is developed. So in Poland, his wife and daughter are accidentally killed by police officers who find out who he is. So when Apocalypse recruits him, he's really tapping into that anger and pain. And there's a really cool scene where he takes him back to Auschwitz and he powers him up, and you can see Magneto using the magnetic forces, and you can see things going around. I really like that. And it was kind of cool to see it interspersed with his memories from X-Men 1 and X-Men First Class. But I did feel later on in the film, when Bryan Singer uses footage again from First Class, it just felt like he was taking the emotional peak of that film and trying to insert it into this. Maybe that was just me. So I can understand why die-hard fans of the character Magneto might be pissed off that they weren't actually seeing Magneto. I didn't actually mind it because I felt like his story was the only one that tried to have an emotional arc in it. His, and maybe at a stretch, Cyclops. I really like the fact that Havoc's death motivates him to become a better man and ultimately the Cyclops that we all know. Yeah, that was alright. The rest of the characters though, it just felt like they were wrestling for some screen time. It just felt kind of style over substance. And when this eventually stumbles into the third act, which does feel a bit generic and city destruction porn that we've seen a million times before, I can't help but feel this is why critics are absolutely blasting it. With all of that aside, there are some really good sequences in there. There are some funny jokes as well. I did laugh a few times in this, and I totally stand by what I said in my spoiler-free review. I definitely think they should have mocapped Oscar Isaac's performance as Apocalypse. There's plenty of evidence in other films to suggest they could have done it, like the Hulk and Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who I consider to be the same level as Apocalypse. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on X-Men Apocalypse, and pause the video now if you want to check out my enjoyment tracker. I know it sounds like I've just shitted all over this film, but I do think there is enough in there to enjoy, especially if you're a fan of the other X-Men films. But I do think that all of the characters meant that you never actually got to dwell on any of them. In fact, as good as the Wolverine cameo was, I would have cut it. I mean, he's literally just there to say, I've got another standalone film, and then he runs off. And I would have cut the scenes with Caliban as well. I just felt like those scenes were a little unnecessary and could have been used for developing the rest of the characters. Anyway, when all is said and done, I did enjoy it, and it does leave it in a good place. I'm still interested in the X-Men characters. I want to see where they take it next. Right at the end of the film, Mystique is doing her best Avengers Assemble speech, and they're all standing there in their own colours, and it looked good. I'm interested to see where it goes. And Bryan Singer always said that he would have directed a really good Dark Phoenix storyline had he continued for X-Men 3. I suppose now he's got the chance. So thanks very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. If you didn't like it, dislike it. Either way, tell me in the comments. Subscribe.